Well, good morning from here in London, and it's a real delight to be introducing today's FS Club webinar, which is on charting a new chapter, how to establish and maintain a portfolio career. And we have with us today Edward Wild, the founder and director of Wild Search. Now, many of you will know me. I'm Michael Mainelli. I am one of the directors of Zien, and it is really my privilege to be able to introduce another one of the webinars in our series. And I can only do this really thanks to the generosity and kindness of our many sponsors who let us range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance. You may be wondering why we're covering today's topic, but I can assure you that we've had one of the better turnouts. It's either the start of the year or it's a number of you have made New Year's resolutions, and I expect to see you firing off your curricula vitae to numerous parties just after this session with Edward, who's the expert on how to get your portfolio career going and how to advance it. Now, I'm not going to introduce Edward because you've seen all of the details and many of the links on the website, and they're still there. And you've read his CV once then and once whilst registering. But today's program is fairly straightforward. My job is to get out of the way and let you hear from Edward, who knows what he's talking about. Edward's going to present for approximately 20 to 25 minutes, and we've saved at least 15 minutes for Q&A and discussion. Quick pointer to you, please do use GoToWebinar question facility. I am here with you online, so I will not be receiving emails. I will not be receiving texts until too late afterwards. But if you use the question facility and just send the questions through, I will feed them into a discussion with Edward afterwards. And then to avoid some obvious questions, the slides are in fact already posted. The transcript and recording will be available approximately 2 days later. And any of the Q&A that you send through to me will have your email attached to it by the GoToWebinar facility, and I will be sending them to Edward. So if you wish to contact Edward directly, just let us know via the question facility, and that will be sent to him later today or tomorrow, and he can get back to you directly. So with those caveats and all, Edward, very much, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michael, and hello, everybody. I'm speaking here from rural East Suffolk, and greetings to you wherever you are. It's great to be part of today's FS Club webinar. I'm just going to talk you through both a little bit about my background, and then get on to portfolio careers, my interest in them. We've got some polls coming up as well, which I hope you'll enjoy engaging in. And then, as Michael says, I'll answer questions later, and by all means, get in touch with me afterwards if you'd like to follow up on anything more specifically or personal to your own circumstances. So, by way of background, I've been a headhunter for the last 17 years. I was initially working on senior government appointments in the public sector, some of the city-based organisations that the government has a relationship with, and government departments and agencies. So from that, I then moved into a boutique firm. I then set up Wild Search 10 years ago, which was our 10th anniversary year. And then in that context and over the last 17 years, I have met a lot of people who are applying to be on boards and chair boards. I've also been dealing with a lot of people who are looking to be on those boards. And obviously, as with any area of employment, the supply is always more limited than the demand. And I think the demand in particular, which I'll come on to later, for non-executive, trustee and board appointments is probably greater now than it's ever been in the last 17 years in which I've been working. And there are a combination of factors in that. Demographics obviously played their part. People wanting to balance work with their life, their wider interests, and that's led to the production of these reports. The reports which I produced, they all start with a similar thesis, which is that the people best qualified to talk about portfolio reports are not headhunters who advise, but those who've actually been involved in them. So in each of these reports, and the latest of which, Charting a New Chapter, we launched just before Christmas, I have interviewed over the course of the last few years, about 50 people or so, and I've tried to include specific case studies. And in the course of this presentation, in the next 20 minutes, you will have some quotations from some of the people that are included in the reports, some of them based in the cities, some of them in Parliament, politics, those and others who've been on trade bodies, and some may be familiar faces or names. They've all, I think, been successful in establishing, developing and maintaining their portfolio careers. And that's obviously what I want to focus on today. So that's enough about me and about the context. The report is available there. Just before we go any further, I think, Michael, we've got a poll.
Yes, we do, actually, Edward. And so I'd just like to launch a quick poll to kind of get a flavor of what the audience thinks. At what age do you think it is best to embark on a portfolio career? Oops, sorry. Great. There we go. I think I may have blown this one. Just bear with me a second. Edward, my apologies. We seem to have a polling issue. Do you mind just proceeding with that?
That's fine.
What would you have answered?
Well, I was just going to say it's never too late, but I think the age at which people embark on a portfolio career has probably gradually gone up over the last few years, and that's probably because people are working longer and indeed living longer. I think the sooner you can get experience of a non-executive appointment or a trustee appointment, I think the better. But in terms of giving up your day job and moving into a portfolio, I think that's probably happening when you feel financially able to take that on. But we'll maybe come on to that later. So just in terms of a definition, so you're all clear, a portfolio career essentially in this context means somebody who doesn't have a full-time job, but that instead sits on a number of boards, trustee appointments in charities, school governing bodies, NHS trusts, also obviously corporate appointments, businesses, startups. Some of those appointments will be paid, some will not be. There we've got the poll coming up now.
Yes, my apologies. Kindly, Morgan Rose has actually picked that up. No. Folks, the poll is now up, as you can see. And we'll get some feedback. My gosh, Edward, you've got a very eager audience. We're up to 60% having voted in split seconds. So thank you for helping us to catch up on time. I'll leave it open for just another second or two. Nearly 90% of the audience has voted. And I'm closing the poll now. And I will now share the results. Again, my apologies for being a little slow there. Well, as you can see, it's very much a middle-age issue here. People thinking it's definitely something that starts later in life. Okay, and then back to you, Edward, if I might.
Well, as I tried to say earlier, this isn't just about theory and practice. I have been on boards of charities and education organisations myself for on and off for the last 15 years, and I'm not even 50 yet. So I tend to be with the small minority, but I think it's never too soon to start, and it's never too late to start. I think that would be my response to the poll. So as I was saying, in portfolio career, there's one of my great friends, Liz Peace, who was, I'm sure some of you will know her. She ran the British Property Federation. Liz is also involved in a number of city-related the regeneration project in Oak Common. I'm sure Michael knows her, but she's had a number of appointments over the last few years, and I think she stepped down from running the British Property Federation at the right time. I don't talk about Liz's age, but I think she was certainly over 50, and she has, I think, had a very fulfilling and rewarding career. And I think partly that's because she's always happy to take things on if she thinks they're of interest, and she's also ready to step down. And I think that's a key message I'd get across to everybody. Never outstay your welcome, either in an executive role or in a non-executive role. In non-executive roles, of course, you have fixed terms, and therefore the opportunity to stay on in an organisation with good corporate governance is not going to be there. But of course, private companies, family businesses and so on, you're probably able to stay on longer. But it's important, even if people want you to stay on, for you to ask whether that's right for you or right for the business and the organisation. I think that use of your own judgment is a really key point in terms of what a portfolio career is about. It's flattering to be asked to stay on, but it's not necessarily the right thing to do. So you make the decision to do it, and obviously that's why many of you are on this webinar today. Moving on to the next slide, what are the benefits of doing it? Well, there's Rodney Baker-Bates, some of you know, a great city figure who, as it happens, also lives just down the road from me here in Suffolk. And but Rodney says there, as you see, I've enjoyed this part of my professional life more than anything else I've done. It's because of the variety, it's because of the people I meet. And you'll be meeting different people, different organisations. The executives of those organisations, of course, are 24/7 focused on the business. Your role is to look at that alongside other organisations with which you're involved, which could be very different in size and scale, in geography, in what their strategic challenges are, and getting into that is the key thing. So you widen your own experience, you learn, you get to meet different people, you learn about different financial, technological issues that you probably wouldn't find if you're just focused on one business. And I think that's something which many people find quite rewarding. The challenges on the next slide, there are unique difficulties of conducting advisory rather than executive work. And I think also being a board member is being different from an advisor. As a headhunter, advise boards, that's very different from sitting in them. So I think understanding the limitations of your role and understanding the ways you can influence are really important. So positive working relationships are crucial. Knowing where the line is drawn between executive and non-executive is something that will differ from organisation to organisation. And some smaller organisations, businesses, charities, they may want you as a non-exec to be more involved than perhaps you would be in say a FTSE 100 company or corporate setting. And my experience is more in the charity world and the education world and the non-profit world than it is in that corporate world. And of course, there are other headhunters who work on board appointments in FTSE 100 companies who would probably be better placed than I am to give you that advice, but you'll probably know who they are, and if not, you can easily find out. So there's Duncan Ingram, who had a corporate career. He was in BT, he's now on board of schools, he chairs a charity, and as he says, it's quite liberating. A big difference is that you don't expect praise or recognition. You're part of a team and not leading anything yourself. And I think for some people who had a very fulfilling and rewarding, financially successful career of 20, 30 years, the idea of going into a setting where you're not actually driving things day to day, where the chief executive is doing that, may take some time to adjust. So temperamentally, the skills, I think, are different, and a great chief executive does not necessarily make a great chair, and indeed a great chair or board member may not have been or could be a great chief executive. So I think there's a sort of commutative, non-commutative element there that you might like to think about. I think remuneration is really important here, and we'll think about that in a moment. But what are you looking to get out of it financially? The reason I wrote that report, sort of about 8 years ago, the first one I did, was because a woman came to me and she'd been in the bank and she was earning, I think, about £200,000 at the time. And I said, well, what are you hoping to earn when you take on the portfolio? And she said, well, about the same as what I earn now. And I just sort of sat back and bit my tongue, and I so wanted to say, well, good luck with that, because I know many people that have had very successful executive careers and earn substantially more, but in their portfolios, they probably earn less than that. So I think that's an important question. You've got to be proactive. It's not a case of applying for a job and then doing it for 10 years. Most board appointments will be fixed terms, as I've said. There'll be a maximum term. So if you're embarking on it, say at 50, which is seen to be a popular age in response to those who are watching this webinar, the danger there is that, by the time you're 60, if everything you take on is at 50, it'll all come to an end by the time you're 60. So knowing when to step back, as I said earlier, knowing when to take something new on, and where to find it, which we'll come on to, are all important considerations. We've now got another poll, I think, Michael.
We do indeed, Edward. And here it is, second poll, very much on how many appointments would you see as being ideal. I'll now hopefully launch this one a bit more successfully. And there we go. So folks, giving you a few seconds to answer there. The fingers on the buzzers are astounding. In under 7 seconds, 50% voted. So catching up. Virtually all the audience has voted. It's great. I'm going to close the poll in just a second. And let me share the results with you. So very much less than 6. So 2 to 3 or 4 to 6, and about evenly split on that one there, if that's okay. Great.
Yeah, perhaps some people will remember there was a Conservative politician some years ago, Sir Geoffrey Rippon, who was regularly in Private Eye, and at one point they had established he had 39 non-executive directorships, and indeed in the city itself, and I'm sure Michael will know Barbara Thomas-Judge, but I mean she's also been in Private Eye because they have highlighted the number of appointments at one point in the past she has held, and I think there is something now that quality rather than quantity is what matters. The demands, the expectations, the strains and stresses of being a chair, certainly, but on a board, are such that if you are not careful, you may have too many things that all come together at once. So I think I'm very much with those voting in the panel. I would say a chairmanship and probably 2 or 3 other roles, and then possibly 1 or 2 unremunerated that take up less time, but even they could take up more. So I think I'm very comfortable with those who are watching, who clearly a sophisticated audience. Now, let's go back a step and look at how to begin. Don't wait until you finish your executive career. Don't come and see a headhunter and say, right, I finish at the end of the month. Now I want to have my portfolio ready in the next sort of 3 months. Prepare, plan. Remember the old military adage, planning preparation prevents piss poor performance. Well, I think you'd say that here, and I think it's absolutely true. You can't start too soon. You can't take on a board appointment. You might take on 1 or 2 board appointments, and then by the time you step down as a chief executive or a partner in a law firm or a city firm, then you can take on a chairmanship. So that's how it tends to work. Think about what you're passionate about, because if you're passionate about it and you're doing it for nothing or giving up time and not being paid much, then you want to enjoy it. Don't rush into things. I'm sure you'll all be having opportunities coming your way every day, both executive and non-executive, but stop and think. Don't take the first thing that comes along, but equally well, don't wait forever. It's good to get a balance of paid and unpaid. Natural momentum kicks in, but I think sometimes the first or second appointment will define what you do next, and then gradually your career in this arena will unfold. And think about the demands of time. Sometimes those that are unpaid will take more time than those that are paid, but then just don't think because it's well paid and the commitment is more limited that you won't be called in and expected to do more than simply attend the board meetings, which I think is absolutely vital in anything, is that the time commitment will often vary, it'll fluctuate, you'd expect to spend more to begin with, and as you become more experienced and know the organisation better, you might be spending a bit less time, but then crises arise and you can get drawn into them, and you may well have to be. Moving on to the next slide, how broad and wide. We've touched on the number of roles. That's to some degree a subjective point, but more is not always more. As I said, overcommitments should be avoided. You can't avoid certain things that may come around. Jenny Watson, who chairs the House of St Barnabas, amongst other responsibilities, she says in the next slide, I'd advise anyone starting on this route to think hard about what might happen if 2 or 3 of the organisations where you have on the board link found themselves in some kind of difficulty simultaneously and required more of your time. So moving on to the next slide, where do I prepare and find opportunities? Well, once you made a decision to begin the journey, identifying the opportunities, you're entering a competitive market. You may well have been consistently and consecutively headhunted from one role to the next, or promoted internally to become managing partner or chief executive. But you're in a competitive market here. The strengths that you had in your professional career may be less in demand, or the competition for people with those skills may be greater if you're going into this route. So as with executive roles, non-executive roles will often involve headhunters. Some roles will be advertised, some will be advertised and headhunters will be at work as well. So the more widely advertised the role is, the more competition there'll be, or certainly the more applications. And of course, applications don't always equate with strong competition. My own experience, as I said earlier, has been more in public bodies and non-profits, but most of the vacancies there will be advertised. So often very interesting roles will be advertised and very competitive. So don't think it's a case of offering to help them and expecting them to take up that offer. You will probably need to fill in application forms, and that will take up time, and you may not always be interviewed, shortlisted, and of course interviewing now is probably via Zoom or Teams or something like that. So be prepared to present yourself in whatever the medium is, and read carefully what they're looking for, because it's a rather obvious point. But if they say, I always say that sometimes there's a difference between people that see one thing they can do and think they can pick the rest up, and the person that thinks they can do everything but one of those things, therefore doesn't apply. And I think those two extremes, and there are sometimes differences between the sort of male and female approach to things, which I think can be can present challenges for people. Just moving on to the next slide, what skills are required? You've got to immerse yourself very deeply. Mary Ryle, who's chaired and been involved in a number of charities and schools, she says you've got to immerse yourself deeply for short periods and then back off and let the team deliver. You've got to be discreet, you've got to listen, you've got to manage your time, and the critical practice as well, which I will do later, is always have someone to help do that for you. And you probably had for 30 years a PA, you probably won't have one unless you want to take one on. So that's important. On the next slide, presentation, I just thought to liven you up sort of 15 minutes into this session. I mentioned George Clooney and his great film Up in the Air, where he has a suitcase which he travels around. And I see that as very much like your CV. Just because you've had 30 years, you don't buy another suitcase for an extra decade in your career. The whole point about the CV, in my view, is you've got to fit everything in it and remain the same size. So how long should your CV be? I say a couple of pages is probably enough, and I think you should keep it fairly punchy, focused particularly on your non-executive appointments. If you're applying for a portfolio career, and your executive career comes further down and becomes increasingly less relevant to your experience as a board member. So I think that's really important. You can read Gary Bernason's book Lose the Resume and Land the Job, which is written by another experienced headhunter, and I think that may be helpful in the context of a portfolio career as well. Moving on to the next slide, a wider perspective, liberating possibilities. You may find not getting too involved in the detail day to day. Taking a macro view is one of the best things about having a portfolio career. And if you're a strategic thinker who doesn't want to be implementing and managing people and so forth, that may be helpful. Jenny Watson, again, there quoted, if you do ask questions and don't feel you're getting answers that satisfy you, I advise you to talk to the chair. So the relationship between the chair and board members, and having a good relationship with the chair if you're a board member, or being an effective chair who is well engaged with not just the chief executive but also the board members, is really important. Moving on to the next slide, commercial or charitable. An important adjustment is that move from the commercial sector to the charitable career, different motivations, as I say, not running for profit, running for an exit, looking for a multiple, but actually looking to maintain a surplus to be able to expand, but to generate the income to do that. Different motivations in different areas. John Drury, who's had a very commercial, varied background, also been some part academic. He's balanced those interests, and I think many of the people I respect with portfolio careers have done the same, and I think that's one of the excitements of it. On to the next slide, how to influence. As my friend and colleague Neil Carmichael. Neil chaired the Education Select Committee in Parliament. He spent the last 3 years building a career of portfolio roles, one more executive, others non-executive, and listening, as I said, is an important point, and developing trust and mutual respect. The next slide, which I've got. A final slide from me is on closing the chapter, and I've hinted at that already, but here we are at the start of the new year. Many of you possibly thinking about embarking on a portfolio career for the first time, or starting to think ahead. Some of you possibly thinking about refreshing what appointments you have and what you want to take on. As with an executive job, you should ask yourself every year, which parts of this portfolio do I enjoy? Which don't I? Where is the frustration greater than the reward and the excitement and the fulfillment? And if the answer, as in a day job, is what, I find it more frustrating and unrewarding than I find it stimulating and exciting, then perhaps it's time to step down. And I think that's something which some people are very reluctant to do, as I said earlier, because often people will say, oh, we'd love you to stay on, and it's such a shame you've got to step down. Well, knowing when to manage your exits, whether you're a president, a prime minister, a politician, or chief executive, that's, I think, one of the most difficult aspects that many people face in their professional life. And as in particularly the political stage, and it's probably topical to say today, Michael, that there's a certain amount of commotion in Washington, and I think that actually the inability to step down, the unwillingness to accept the verdict of the shareholders, the electorate, the board, whoever it might be, is a real challenge for many people who've had successful careers. And I think that the ability to say, look, that's it, I'm moving off, I don't know what I'm going to do next, I don't know what I'm going to take on in its place, is really important. And one of the a pretty senior guy with a portfolio I know, I saw him, this inspired this final chapter in the report. I saw him about 3 or 4 years ago, and I said, what are you doing? He said, just stepped down from chairing a board. And I said, hey, what are you taking on? And he said, you know what, I'm 70 now, I've got grandchildren, I think my wife wants me to spend more time with her. And I said, well, that's fine. You don't need to feel that everything needs to be replaced. So there is a time at which, and many of you, I'm sure, are a long way off that point, but there's no harm in saying you're retired or you're retiring. And, there's plenty more you can do. Not a lot at the moment, but in a normal situation, you can travel, you can spend time with your family, you can spend time with your friends, you can play more golf when that's allowed. So, get out there and do it. So finally, before we come to questions, another poll, Michael, which I think, let's see how many people are tuning in and responding to that.
That's great, Edward. So folks, just to close, with which of these statements do you agree? And I believe you can, in fact, answer more than one. So is it really only commercial paid roles that matter? Are unpaid roles there really to give the only rewarding variety, or unpaid roles there really only useful to get paid roles? And finally, a good portfolio means a mixture of paid and unpaid. So your thoughts on all of those there. Great. I'm just going to close that, Edward, and present the results. And you can see here, actually, our audience believes in a good balance of life between paid and unpaid, very strongly. In fact, 88%. So that's good. A fantastic contribution there. So let me do that. Let's move, if we could, Edward. Thank you so much for that. I think it was a bit extreme, actually using the White House to illustrate the need to close a chapter in one's life. We've got quite a few questions and comments here, so just get firing if I can. Well, the first one here, and I may not be reading the names out, folks, because some of you may want to be a little quiet about this, but this question here, I've been looking at various NED trustee training guidance courses. Is there one you would recommend?
Yeah, I thought that might come up, and I had thought about addressing that in my slides. I think that Okay, so my headline to that is, look, I think this is a new chapter in your career. You've had probably no prior training as such if you've not been on a board. So I think it's really important if I see someone that says, look, I've done this for 30 years, now I want to go on a board, I'm going to say, well, have you thought about it? What have you done? So in principle, that's a great idea. In practice, of course, there are lots of organisations out there wanting to take your money for courses of one sort or another. I have myself went on a course at Harvard Business School 5 years ago, which I found incredibly stimulating about launching new ventures. I'm at the moment personally looking at courses in digital disruption and how to develop your business that way. I've looked at Judge, I've looked at INSEAD, I've looked at Harvard Side and so forth. I think as with education more broadly, the better the institution, the more it'll cost, but there's a reason for that. So economics plays its part. If you're looking at charities, there's the CAS Centre for Charity Effectiveness. The IOD, of course, runs a load of courses. One of the problems is, though, if everyone's doing the courses, then how does it give you the edge? So I think the courses that demand more of you, both in terms of time and money, probably, and give you the opportunity to engage with others who've done it, would be what I look at. And I think smaller gatherings of people you can interrogate, but also learning some of the rules, the framework, the theory is important too. So, again, I give some more thought to that, but, I think have a look at the respected business schools, education institutions, Cranfield, of course, as well, and see what's out there and look at what they're offering you and what you can get out of it.
If I might interject, from a personal note on a slightly different angle, not just the NED and directorial background, but a lot of people end their career with, say, a weakness in finance or a weakness in economics or a weakness in HR. And these days, with the various online courses that are freely available on EDX, et cetera, by all means, take a short 2 or 4 week online course to fill in some of those gaps as well. Julia, actually, I realized that previous question, I can say it was from Michael. Let's leave it at that. Julia's got a number of questions here. She appears to be somebody who is currently a very busy executive. So she's curious, as a busy exec with a fairly young family, I've struggled with thinking about where to find the time, how much time beyond the formal meeting usually needed. And she would also like a little bit of advice of how do you get your first non-executive directorship in a competitive environment if you're up against experienced NEDs?
Yeah, I think that's three elements to that question. But I think in terms of time, good employers should be allowing whether it's the chief executive to be on another board or an executive to be on a board of some sort. So that should be factored in. Of course, it doesn't mean if you're in a client-driven environment, the work doesn't need to be done, but the work can probably be done outside traditional office hours. Look, you've got to make the time for it, but employers should allow that, or that should be factored in. So that's one part to the question. The other part is, look, I think in some ways, if you're in an executive role, you've got a lot to bring to it. If you're up against people who are simply in a portfolio, then yes, they've got more experience on boards, but they're actually getting further from the day-to-day running of a business. So, in that sense, I wouldn't be discouraged. I would say you're bringing something different. And I would think most boards want a combination of people who are both in executive roles and this is their non-exec appointment, or those who are doing a portfolio of things. So I wouldn't worry about that. How you manage your own time is the big one of the big challenges of being a non-executive, because and making sure meetings don't clash, and of course prioritizing it. I think boards should respect those people who've got executive roles and should also factor in the time and the thing about when meetings happen. I think organizations which are mindful of people's other commitments, particularly if it's a full-time job, should be taken on board. Yeah.
Okay, we've got some interesting questions here about the risks that are involved. Mike is curious about what's your view on potential liabilities you might take on as a NED versus just an advisory capacity. And Valerie is asking, it'd be useful to get some of Edward's insights into how to conduct due diligence and what red flags to look out for.
Yes, gosh, they're both both tough questions. I mean, I think it's absolutely right. You know, headhunters will give you their briefing, their experience, and their knowledge. I think it's really important to do your own due diligence. I think that obviously some businesses will be in the public, have a high public profile, and the information's in the public domain. But if they're private companies, if they're smaller businesses, they probably don't have to. They don't have the same degree of accountability. So you're absolutely right. I think it comes back to my point. Just because you're asked to do something or invited to join a board, it doesn't mean you've got to accept. So if you've got your own concerns, then I would say just walk away. And I've worked on a very high profile chairmanship of a public body some years ago, and actually the guy I was really keen to take it on was himself. He chaired a FTSE 100 company, but he didn't want to chair this because he looked into the finances which were in the public domain, and he just thought it was too high risk. So there's no doubt there are risks involved, and I think if you're advising, that is different from being on a board. You're part of a team, you have a corporate responsibility there, and therefore everyone that's watching this is right to think carefully and not to dive in and take whatever comes along, or if you think that the business or the organization is on a very downward and irreversible trajectory, then those who are involved now have got to deal with that and don't get involved unless you can turn it around. But that's not the job, really.
Quite a few questions and comments really related to various aspects of balancing this portfolio. I'm going to pick up on a couple if I might. David early on was asking, how do you balance specific skills and experience and breadth in non-executive roles? Do organizations know what they need?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because it's about that sort of vertical horizontal aspect to this. So obviously every board will want a finance and audit chair. So if you're a partner in an accountancy firm in the city, or you're an FD, then that will be the field. The field there is self-defining. If you're expert in marketing, if you're an expert in IT or CIO or whatever, then that's a different expertise. So I think very often you'll see, certainly anything that's advertised or in a brief that you may get from a headhunter, they'll say that they are particularly interested in. And I would say that when we say if they're particularly interested in, I would be inclined to say if you don't bring these things, then probably better not to apply, because people will, and if you don't bring them, then you may not be there. But I think equally well, and it comes back to the point about being an advisor. Look, if they want legal advice that is binding, then they will have a law firm, and similarly financial advice, have an accountancy firm. So don't get drawn in if you think that the organisation is actually possibly trying to save money on your professional fees, and I think that's something which obviously a FTSE 100, 250 quoted companies probably will almost certainly not do that, but some smaller organisations may sort of feel, well you're a lawyer, what's your view? No, your job as a lawyer on a board is to look at those, a fund manager, let's say, or a fund manager, there'll be a finance committee, an investments committee, and you're there to look at the people that are pitching to you to manage your funds. You're not managing the funds for the charity yourself or the school. So, yeah.
Following on from that, and you've partially answered, but I'd just like to give Corin a chance here. She's interested in your thoughts on, do you think the trend is to recruit generalists these days rather than specialists? And this seems to apply to remuneration committees with members knowing little about HR or remuneration, or one wouldn't dream of not having finance experience to sit on the audit committee, et cetera. Do you think this is the general trend? And if so, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because about 13 years ago, I was writing a book on challenges facing boards, which unfortunately the timing for that publication was about as bad as it could have been, because we were due to launch it in sort of late September of 2008. And everyone watching, I'm sure, will remember the events of September, October 2008. And so we didn't do it. But one of the people I interviewed for that was Sir Win Bischoff, who many of you will know, one of the great city figures. And, I was reflecting on the collapse of the banks and what were his views on that. And his view then, which I'm sure others would share, is that you probably need in a bank majority, but not a large majority of board members who've got experience with the industry. And I think that's applicable to other industries. But then actually you need a number of people who can stand back and say, look, I can't quite understand that, because actually very often, so some of those businesses that fell apart in the sort of 2008, there were a lot of people in the boardrooms who did not really understand how the business worked, and therefore they weren't asking some of those questions. So people that are generalists and can say, look, actually, because I'm not in this, I mean, I sit on the board of the Royal School of Church Music, and I'm not a musician, and I think we've got a majority of board members who are musicians and conduct choirs. And actually, I will say, look, I don't really quite get this. And there's a danger you can have a board where there's a sort of group think, where people are talking amongst themselves because they all speak the same language. Worse still, they're using the same acronyms. And if you're not one of that, that's actually your strength. So I think if you're applying for an organization where you're not an expert in what that organization does, but there are aspects of what they do that you can help with, then I think that's a strength. And if they don't want you because you're not an expert, then it's the wrong board, wrong organization.
Susan is curious about your thoughts. Who, in your view, should be on the hiring panel for a non-executive director?
That's a really good question. I think it's important that particularly if you're appointing a chair, that they have a chance to meet with the chief executive. The chief executive doesn't make the decision, but there needs to be a chemistry between them. There needs to be complementarity. I think you need to have you need to have obviously other board members generally. I think it's very good to have an independent board member on that panel as well, or an advisor. I think also feedback. I always encourage clients when we're doing an interview of that kind to have engagement with the staff. So actually, not that the people in the organisation are choosing who's sitting on their board, but actually getting feedback. So in schools, for example, getting feedback from pupils, getting their engagement is important. I think that organisations that almost say, well, this decision's above a load of people in the organisation, or actually that can come back to bite them. So I would say that that's a really good question, and I think probably all organisations should think a bit more carefully about who they involve in that process, because I think that the more people are involved, the more perspectives on an individual and certain traits that may not come up in a formal setting may come in an informal setting that may say something about how someone could behave in a formal setting. So I think that's I think we probably can all do better on that.
We spoke quite a bit about this sort of from the company side. I'd like to put forward a few, we don't have a lot of time, so quite snappy questions, really from the perspective of potential non-executives. So the first one from Ed, do people tend to focus their portfolio interests on a particular theme that interests them, education, sport, healthcare, or do you see people building portfolios better where there's a deliberate variety of themes?
I think variety is good. I think too much diversity and too many contrasts can be unhelpful. So I think people tend to group things in one or two or three areas, I would say. So they may have appointments, two in one area, two in another, two in a third. But I think that you've got to be an experienced generalist to some degree, but I think having complementary insights can be helpful. So if you've got five totally different organisations, then I'm not sure. I mean, people do it, but I'm not sure whether that makes them the best portfolio person on board.
It helps to have some thread going through them, definitely.
Yeah, exactly.
Robin is curious. I'm a consultant and engaged with those at executive levels, but not been an executive myself. Would I be at a disadvantage to other potential heads?
Well, I think as with executive roles, I think you've got to be prepared to put in a few applications, and probably quite a few. When I spoke at my son's school a while ago, I brought a sheaf of letters. I had rejection letters from when I left university and applied for jobs. And I think that, don't think, as I said early on in the talk, don't think just because you've been progressively promoted, you've always got the promotion you wanted in your day job. It'll be like that in the portfolio. And actually, don't give up. The people I like and respect who've done this successfully, it takes a year or more to build up a portfolio, and then you've got to start to think about refreshing it. So don't think that Rome's built in a day. This is something that is you've got to plan a few months. So if you start your portfolio in January, I would say by this time next year, hopefully you will have 3 or 4 appointments of varied and stimulating nature. But don't think it's going to happen by Easter, particularly not at the moment.
Harry, who I think might know you, says most of his experience has been in the exec and non-exec, nonprofit and public sector. What would your insights be in moving into a chair role? He's currently chairing an audit and risk committee.
Yeah, well, I think that's. I mean, I kind of you talk about it, but yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I think obviously if you've been on 2 or 3 boards, then stepping up, and I think actually also people who've got experience in running a large, complex charity probably would have a lot to bring to a board. I saw today there's a new new chair of Travis Perkins, who I don't know, but she runs the one of the city organisations, Michael, doesn't she? And she's previously ran a large charity, and I thought that was an interesting appointment, and that's a sort of appointment which I think is helpful. Someone coming from a different perspective, challenging some of those assumptions. But I think eventually everyone's got to step up, and I think if you've been on 2 or 3 boards or advising them, then why not apply to chair them? I think everyone's got to do something for the first time.
Let me try and squeeze 2 in quickly, though. Donald would like, Edward, have you any advice on how to avoid becoming too executive as a non-executive director?
Yeah, I think whether it's an email, whether it's in a meeting, whether it's on a call, probably just pause, stop, reflect, remind yourself that you're not running the organisation, and I think probably it comes with experience.
Yeah, I must say one of the rules I've always had as a non-exec has been never ever to communicate directly with anybody in the organization other than the chairman and the chief executive. Just feed everything through them, and that's a good discipline as well, because you begin to see the amount of traffic that you have. You don't get pulled in. The executive line shouldn't be crossed. Yeah, and very finally, and ambitiously, I might add, James is asking what sorts of activities should someone earlier in their career, say in their first 10 to 15 years, be doing to prepare for a future portfolio career? Are there opportunities for non-exec work earlier in your career?
Absolutely, and I think it's, as I said earlier, it's never too early to start. I think you should volunteering is helpful, helping organisations, and then through that you get to know them, and then they might say, "Would you like to join the board?" So I think absolutely, just you can apply. I've encouraged people in their 20s, 30s to join boards. I encouraged someone literally about a month ago. I sent her 2 briefs and said, "Look, I think you should think about this." So I don't think it's ever too young to start, and the more experience you build up, the easier it will be to go into that as your full-time activity rather than something you do in addition.
Edward, wow, what a tour de force. You've really covered a lot of ground, and I know we've run over by a minute or 2, but I think it was worth it. The audience engagement has been fantastic. If you can give me just a second, I've got 3 rounds of thanks. The first, as ever, to our sponsors. Although this really isn't quite about technology and economics and finance specifically, in truth, who is on our board is clearly a matter of great concern to everyone. And I think Edward has done a great expostulation of what that involves and how rich the subject area is. We could have dived into a number of places here. I'd also like to thank the audience. I don't know if it's the new year, I don't know if it's new resolutions, and I don't know if it's you're all out job seeking, but nevertheless, it's been fantastic. And thank you for your contributions. I will point out that we have a very full agenda next week, starting with things to do with employee share ownership on Monday. We're going to be looking at the interesting area of parametric insurance. It's more interesting than it might sound to some of you out there. Basically, how do you turn insurance into a specific event? We have MasterCard on Wednesday looking at private sector identification, which I think is going to be exciting because they've done a lot of groundwork in this. Another area on data privacy on the future risk of liability on Thursday. And very finally, we're going to be having a fantastic session with Nick Robbins on really leading up to COP, the road to net zero finance. So a lot happening next week, and I hope to see many of you there. But really, Edward, the thanks to you today are for really going and giving us some inspiration about this rich world of non-executive directorships. In these days of lockdown, I've had to bring my own lockdown audience. I'm unable to open the floodgates, so I have my Korean karmic clapper, which I will use to sound the applause that would have been there if I'd been able to open the
Thank you
floodgates.
very much.
I really appreciate your time today and your insights, and
Pleasure.
I hope that you've inspired a lot of people to go out and grasp this. There are great opportunities there, an opportunity to do good, and it's not about the money.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.